When a millionaire mom caught her housekeeper alone with her autistic son, speaking to him in 9 different languages, she was furious at first. But what she discovered next? It didn't just change her son's life. It changed everything. From nonverbal to multilingual, from silent to smiling, this is the story of how a woman society overlooked became the hero no one saw coming. You won't believe what happens next. Stick around. Stop. What do you think you're doing with my son? If you love stories where the underestimated rise and justice hits hard, don't just watch. Join the VIP fam. Hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications, because here, we don't just tell stories. We drop moments that change everything. Julia Carmichael's voice rang out like a thunderclap through the vast marble hallway of her Beverly Hills mansion. She was furious, her heels clacking sharply against the polished floors as she stormed toward the open playroom door. There, in a room filled with high-end sensory toys and untouched educational tablets, stood a sight that made her stop in her tracks. Her housekeeper, Maria, was kneeling beside her 7-year-old son, Leo, a quiet, wide-eyed boy with a diagnosis of nonverbal autism. But Leo wasn't sitting in his usual silence, withdrawn from the world. He was speaking. Gelato. Effreddo, Leo said softly, touching a cold scoop of fake ice cream on a flashcard. Julia's heart skipped. Her son had just said a full sentence in Italian? What is going on here? Julia demanded again, her voice a mix of disbelief and anger. You're not a therapist. You're here to clean, not teach my son. Maria stood slowly, placing the flashcard down with care. Her hands trembled slightly, but her face remained calm. I'm so sorry, ma'am. I was just helping him with language exercises. I didn't mean any harm. Julia crossed her arms tightly. And who told you to do that? I pay speech therapists thousands a week, and even they haven't gotten him to say full sentences. And now you... What? Decide to run your own little school behind my back? Maria didn't argue. She just nodded respectfully. I understand why you're upset, but Leo, he responds to languages. I noticed it when I spoke to him in Spanish while cleaning one day. He smiled. That was the first time I'd seen him smile. Julia's throat tightened. She hadn't seen Leo smile in weeks. Still, her walls were up. I don't need unlicensed experiments on my child. You're not trained, you're... She stopped herself. A housekeeper. That's what she was about to say. But as she looked at Maria, still standing calmly, protectively near her son, Julia realized she didn't know anything about this woman she'd hired over a year ago. Leo was now humming softly. He picked up a Japanese flashcard with a little sun on it. Tayo, he whispered. Japanese? Julia said, stunned. Are you teaching him multiple languages? Maria looked embarrassed now. Yes, 9, to be exact. I only introduced them slowly. Spanish, French, Japanese, Mandarin. He takes to them like music. Julia sat down without realizing it. She looked at her son, this quiet boy who rarely made eye contact, now flipping through a set of cards and softly speaking unfamiliar words with surprising clarity. How long has this been going on? She asked. Maria swallowed. Almost 3 months. I started with simple words during cleanup time. I didn't think it would go far, but... Leo kept wanting more. Julia's hands went limp in her lap. Her eyes filled with tears she didn't expect. 3 months. 3 months of her son communicating, learning, connecting. And she hadn't known. None of the expensive therapists, tutors, or neurodevelopmental specialists had come even close to this. And all this time, the key had been standing quietly in her kitchen. Vacuuming carpets and folding laundry? I should have told you earlier, Maria said. But I was afraid you wouldn't let me continue. I didn't want to take that light away from him. There was a long pause. Leo stood, walked over, and gently placed a card in Julia's lap. It had one word on it, Mama, written in Korean. He pointed to it and smiled. Julia burst into tears. This moment, so simple, so powerful, changed her heart forever. She looked up at Maria. We're going to have a serious conversation, but for now, thank you. Maria nodded, tears tears in her own eyes now. Julia looked at her son again. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time she felt hope. And it had come from the Mo Leo had been diagnosed with nonverbal autism when he was just 3 years old. The doctors had been kind, but blunt. He may never speak in full sentences, one had told Julia. So she did what any mother with resources would do. She fought. She spent thousands on the best speech therapists in Los Angeles. She flew in child development specialists. She even had an entire sensory room custom-built in their mansion, filled with high-end equipment and interactive programs. But year after year, Leo barely spoke. He'd say a few words, sometimes yes or mama, but mostly he lived in a quiet, gentle world of his own. Until today. Now, he was speaking in Italian, right in front of her. Not just parroting sounds, but understanding them. Julia couldn't sleep that night. Questions swirled in her mind. Who is Maria? What else has she been doing? What has she been hiding? She went downstairs, made herself a drink, and pulled up. The mansion's security footage from the past few weeks. Her intention was clear. Find a reason to fire Maria, but what she saw stopped her cold. There, on the screen, was her son, smiling, laughing, engaging. He wasn't just sitting silently with toys. He was sitting at the kitchen table, stirring pancake batter while Maria labeled ingredients in Spanish. Huevos. Leche. Azúcar, Maria would say gently, holding each item. Leo repeated after her, carefully, focused. Then another clip, Maria and Leo in the garden, pointing at flowers. Fleur, she said softly in French. Fleur, Leo echoed, touching a rose. Clip after clip, moment after moment, she watched as her son, her nonverbal son, used flashcards, music, painting, even food prep to learn languages. Real ones, French, Spanish, Mandarin, Japanese, even a little Swahili. Maria didn't pressure him. She guided him. Patient. Gentle. Like she knew something the experts didn't. Then came the moment that broke Julia. In one video, Leo sat cross-legged on the floor with flashcards spread out around him. He looked at Maria, his eyes bright. Then, he said it, clear as day. Merci, Maria. Thank you, Maria. Julia dropped her glass. It shattered across the marble. She gasped, covering her mouth. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Her son, the boy who barely spoke to her, was thanking someone in French. Not only that, he meant it. You could hear it in his voice. Julia sat back in the chair, stunned. Why didn't the therapists ever show this side of him? She whispered to herself. Why didn't I? Her $1,000,000 treatments, her cutting-edge tools, her army of professionals, none of them had unlocked her son. But Maria had. The next morning, the sun rose gently over the Carmichael estate. But inside, tension buzzed like static. Julia Carmichael wasn't one to feel nervous. Ever. But as she sat at the massive oak dining table, across from the woman who had quietly become her son's greatest teacher, she realized she didn't even know the first thing about her. She cleared her throat. Maria, I owe you an apology. Maria glanced up from her mug of tea, surprised. Julia continued, voice softer than usual. You've done something I never thought possible. You've reached Leo. Not just reached him, you've awakened him. But I need to know, who are you? Really? There was a long pause. Maria's eyes lowered as if she were bracing herself for judgment. Then she spoke quietly. I used to be a linguistics professor. In Brazil. Julia blinked. Wait, what? Maria nodded. Yes, I taught at the University of São Paulo. I specialized in child language acquisition, multilingual development. My passion was helping children who struggled with traditional learning, especially neurodivergent students. Julia was floored. This woman, who dusted her bookshelves, folded her laundry, scrubbed her marble countertops, had once been a professor? Maria's voice trembled. After my husband passed, everything changed. I had no family left. I needed to start over. I moved here with nothing. I thought I'd find work in education, but my visa status made it nearly impossible. No school would sponsor me. So, I cleaned houses. Julia stared in disbelief. You speak how many languages? 9, Maria said. Fluently. Portuguese, Spanish, French, Mandarin, Japanese, German, Swahili, Russian, and English. Julia's breath caught in her throat. Maria looked up and her eyes filled with quiet emotion. I never expected to teach again. I never even imagined it. But then I met Leo, and I saw something in him that no one else seemed to notice. Julia listened, completely still. He's not broken, Mrs. Carmichael, Maria said, her voice stronger now. He's brilliant. His brain works in patterns, like music, languages, our rhythm, melody, repetition. That's why he connects with them. Not because he's behind, but because the way he processes information is different. Not less. Just different. Julia swallowed hard, her eyes burning. All this time she'd been trying to fix Leo, desperately searching for something to pull him into a normal world. But what if he didn't need fixing at all? What if all he needed was understanding? I had no idea, Julia said quietly. You've been here over a year. Why didn't you say anything? Maria gave a sad smile. Because people don't usually ask, and because I didn't want to lose this job. I didn't want to overstep, but when Leo started responding, I couldn't stop. I couldn't ignore what I saw in him. He's special, Julia, truly special. Julia leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed. Her whole world had shifted overnight. She'd built an empire, managed investment firms, led corporate takeovers. But somehow she'd missed the most powerful opportunity of her life, right under her own roof. And the person who brought it to light wasn't a doctor, wasn't a therapist. It was the woman who folded her towels and swept her floors with care. Maria, Julia said slowly, would you consider becoming Leo's full-time tutor? Maria blinked. You mean no more cleaning? No, Julia smiled. You're not my housekeeper anymore. You're my son's teacher, if you're willing. Maria's hands shook slightly. Her voice cracked. I would be honored. In that moment, two women from vastly different worlds shared one unspoken truth. Sometimes, the right people enter our lives in the most unexpected ways, and sometimes they see what we never could. The very next day, Julia Carmichael made the change official. She brought Maria into her office, a room where million-dollar contracts were usually signed, and offered her something far more important. Maria, she said with a smile, I want you to quit your cleaning job and become Leo's full-time language coach. Maria's eyes widened. Her hands fluttered over her heart, unable to speak for a moment. Julia continued, her voice trembling with emotion. You've done more for my son in 3 months than a dozen professionals have done in 3 years. I don't want you wasting your brilliance on laundry anymore. I want you doing what you were born to do. Teach. Maria blinked back tears. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything, Julia replied. What happened after that was nothing short of magic. Maria crafted a unique multilingual curriculum just for Leo, one that didn't rely on screens or structured drills, but instead flowed with Leo's natural rhythms and interests. She turned mealtimes into vocabulary lessons, gardening into science discussions, and playtime into global storytelling. She didn't just teach words, she taught meaning, emotion, connection. By week 6, Leo could identify colors, animals, and food in Spanish and French. By month 3, he was greeting guests in Japanese and describing his feelings in Portuguese. Once terrified of eye contact, Leo now lit up when someone entered the room. Konnichiwa, he'd shout with a grin. Once withdrawn and afraid to be touched, he now ran to hug Maria at the start of every lesson. But the moment that made Julia cry in front of her staff was this. Leo walked into the living room, stood proudly in front of the fireplace where Julia was sipping tea, and declared, Mama, you are my corazon. Then in French, Tu es mon soleil. And finally, in perfect English, you are my sunshine. Julia dropped her cup and burst into tears. Her boy, her silent boy, was not just speaking, he was expressing love. Julia began documenting Leo's journey, carefully, respectfully. on a private Instagram page for close friends and family. But one night, she decided to make a video public. It was a clip of Leo, laughing as he held up a toy elephant, exclaiming in Spanish, "Es un elefante feliz." It's a happy elephant. The video went viral. In just 48 hours, it had over 3 million views. The comments poured in. Is this real? A non-verbal autistic child speaking 5 languages? I'm crying. This gives me hope for my own son. Who is this amazing teacher? The answer was always the same, Maria. Maria didn't just teach Leo, she unlocked him. She saw what no one else had the time, training, or patience to see, that behind Leo's silence was a world bursting with potential. All he needed was someone to speak his language, even if it meant learning 9 of them. Other parents from around the world began reaching out. They didn't ask about Julia's wealth or specialists or private doctors. They asked one thing, how? Did you do it? And Julia always gave the same answer. We didn't. Maria did. Soon Maria had offers, schools begging her to speak, universities asking her to consult, autism advocacy groups offering her platforms, but she declined most of them. I just want to teach Leo, she said. That's what matters right now. And for Julia, that was everything. She no longer saw Maria as an employee. She saw her as family. She began working with immigration lawyers to help Maria secure a proper teaching visa. And later, she funded a program to help other immigrant educators find jobs in their fields, even if they started in kitchens or cleaning. Because sometimes the people with the most talent are the ones we never think to ask. And as for Leo, he continued to blossom. He started writing stories in Mandarin, singing lullabies in French, and asking questions like, do animals in Africa speak Swahili too? He wasn't just catching up. He was soaring. One evening, Julia stood by Leo's doorway, watching him and Maria finish a lesson. He laughed, then turned to Julia and said in perfect English, Mama, did you know that love is the same in every language? Julia smiled through tears. Yes, baby. Now 6 months later, the marble foyer of the Carmichael estate, usually reserved for luxury galas and silent auctions, was packed with reporters, cameras, and a sense of anticipation. Julia. Carmichael stood behind a polished podium, wearing a simple white blouse, no diamonds, no designer labels. Just a mother with a story the world needed to hear. Beside her stood her son Leo, holding Maria's hand. The crowd quieted. The flash of cameras faded into silence. Julia took a deep breath and spoke. I'm a woman who could afford the best. Tutors in the world. I've hired Ivy League specialists, private therapists, and tech developers. But none of them gave my son what he needed. The person who changed his life wasn't in a lab coat. She wasn't in an office with a PhD. She was in my kitchen, wearing an apron, humming in Portuguese. Her name is Maria, a housekeeper with a gift, and a heart no money could ever buy. A ripple of emotion moved through the room. Even the reporters put their pens down. Julia gestured to Maria, who smiled humbly, her eyes already welling with tears. Maria taught my son 9 languages, but more than that, she taught me something, that brilliance can come from anywhere, that talent doesn't always wear a title, and that love, the right kind of love, can unlock a silent world. Applause thundered through the room. Then Julia made her biggest announcement. Today, I am launching a foundation. It's called Unlocking Voices. Its mission is twofold. 1, to fund educational visas for skilled immigrants like Maria, people whose talents have been buried by bureaucracy. And 2, to train teachers in neurodiverse learning methods so that children like my Leo aren't seen as problems, but as possibilities. Cameras clicked. Reporters stood clapping. One even wiped away a tear. Maria stood frozen, overcome with emotion. She had spent years cleaning corners, hiding her degrees, her dreams, her past. Now, the world knew her name, and as for Leo, he's now the youngest multilingual speaker at his special needs school. He holds short conversations in 5 languages. He reads bedtime stories to his classmates. He even created a language buddy group to help other students learn new words using the same playful techniques Maria once taught him at the kitchen counter, but more importantly, he's happy. They be Boy who once hid behind furniture now runs through the house laughing, humming Mandarin songs, greeting guests in Japanese, and telling corny jokes in French. And every night before bed, he hugs Maria and Julia and whispers in English. Thank you for listening. Julia now spends less time in boardrooms and more time in classrooms, working to get unlocking voices into schools nationwide. She knows her wealth didn't save her son, a woman's belief did, and she wants the world to know greatness doesn't always come in a suit. Genius doesn't always speak loudly, and sometimes the person who sees the light in your child is the one most people never even notice. Because every child deserves someone who believes they can. And for Leo, that someone was Maria. I do.